In the corridors of British power, the influence of old money is more pervasive than many realize, shaping policies and political destinies. This elite cadre, entrenched through generations, not only sponsors political careers, but also dictates the broader agenda, ensuring their interests are always at the forefront. Today, we'll uncover how this powerful group continues to pull the strings from the shadows of the House of Lords to the benches of Parliament. Let's go back in time and look at the complicated past of the British aristocracy and how they have shaped politics for a long time. There is more to this story than just money and power. It's about how these things have shaped British politics, from the sprawling farms in the countryside to the gothic spires of Parliament. Once, the landed gentry and royalty were the ones who played politics in Britain. Large pieces of land weren't just a sign of wealth, they were also a way to get political power. Peerages were often given out based on land ownership and social standing, which showed how powerful the aristocracy was. This created a cycle where land bought power, and power bought more land. In 18th century, a very important time in British history, we see that the country was generally prosperous and united, even though there were some deep-seated disagreements. The War of the Spanish Succession had just ended, and Britain had become a very strong country by taking over more land and making its government stronger. During this time, the Hanoverians rose to power and crowned a new ruler in Britain. At this time, there was a lot of connection between the aristocracy and government power. This was shown by the old corruption system, which did well until the early 1800s. In that time, people of the aristocracy were often given government jobs which were well paid that didn't require much or any work. People during and after the system were seen as seeing it as the worst kind of corrupt government, representing a time when private gain often came before public good. But not everything in the realm of power stayed the same. By the middle of the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution had started to change the economy in new ways. The old wealth of land was being challenged by new wealth from industry. Still, it took some time for the new wealth to reach the old aristocrats. It wasn't until 1856 that the first manufacturer was made a lord. This was the start of the slow but inevitable mixing of the new money into old money in British politics. As the story goes on, it becomes clear that the aristocracy's role in politics has changed. What used to be a simple relationship between owning land and having political power slowly changed into a more complicated one, involving new economic wealth and bigger changes in society. This serves as a reminder that the past often shapes the present in ways we may not see at first. Let's see how their power changed over time, from overt to covert. At first, the British aristocracy used their power publicly by owning land, holding titles, and being involved in political bodies like the House of Lords.
Lead with government business.
However, I can report to the House that a pilot to return these bookings.
With the rise of democracy and a more watchful public, however, these overt shows of power became less acceptable and possible as social norms and political structures changed. As more political changes were pushed for in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the British peerage faced more and more problems. During this time, there were major constitutional problems that forced the aristocracy to change how they influenced people. The introduction of more open government processes and the gradual removal of hereditary peers from government showed a change in the way power had to be used. By the modern era, British aristocrats and other similar groups had changed by hiding their power in areas that were less obvious. This entailed planning marriages, making covert alliances, and using money to their advantage by building huge estates and business ties that have continued to have a big impact on society and politics. This change was shown even more by the rise of covert operations and intelligence jobs, which made it possible to change the political and economic landscapes in a more subtle but still effective way. Today's covert strategies use intelligence operations to change both national and foreign policies. This is a more complex change from their earlier, more direct forms. In Britain, there is a huge difference between those who have a lot of money and those who don't. With 104 billionaires worth a total of over £301 billion, or an average of £3 billion each, the difference in wealth is clear. The poorest fifth of people, on the other hand, have less than a tenth of this income. A small group of wealthy people has a lot of economic power and, more importantly, political impact, which is often hidden behind the idea of market forces.
But perhaps now we understand more. My father was always very clear that he would succeed.
This narrative isn't just about numbers. It reflects a deep-seated power structure that has evolved from the days when landowners and industrialists directly held seats in Parliament. Today, although the mechanisms of influence are less visible, they are no less potent. The modern capitalist state relies on MPs and various branches of the ruling class, including police chiefs, military generals, judges, and top civil servants, to maintain the status quo. These figures ensure the state operates in the interest of the capitalist class, often under the banner of law and order, protecting minority wealth from the majority who produce it. Yet it's crucial to note that the state and capital are not entirely synonymous. Elected officials still make significant decisions that affect the ease with which the ruling class can pursue their interests, such as decisions on war, workers' rights, public funding, and minimum wage laws. These decisions have direct consequences on wealth distribution within society. Understanding this dynamic underscores why considerable resources are funneled into lobbying and political donations, particularly by business leaders eager to secure their interests. It explains why the Conservative Party, often seen as representing these elite interests through a network of old boys, has historically sought to curtail the power of trade unions, ensuring that the capitalist class retains its advantage. Like the story of International Motors Limited stands out. This company gave a staggering £2.1 million to the Conservative Party in 2006. It was the biggest gift ever recorded on the Electoral Commission's list. Because of this kind of donation, we can see how deeply corporations are rooted in the democratic system. Even though these gifts are open to the public and are regulated, they add to a worrying story about how businesses can change the course of politics for a fee. Next is David Cameron, who used to be Prime Minister and is now a consultant for Greensill Capital.
As well, even more serious than the Strictly Come Dancing one. And he'll appreciate this because El Gato, his cat, is particularly famous.
This part of his life is a good example of the revolving door, which is a name for people who move from working for the government to working for private companies. Cameron used his large network, which he built while working at Downing Street, to push for Greensill and try to get lucrative government contracts during the COVID-19 pandemic. Even though what he did was almost certainly illegal, it caused a public uproar about the moral issues that come up when business and politics mix. Corporations have a lot of power, and it's not just through donations. They also run the media. Another name, Rupert Murdoch, whose name is linked to media and power, has been a major player in British politics for a long time.
It's about Roger for the BBC. Are you worried about Ofcom at all?
No.
Hello?
You should be worried about BBC itself.
For decades, his newspapers and TV stations have changed popular opinion and election results. This effect was very clear in 1997, when Murdoch's The Sun famously switched its support to Tony Blair. This was seen by many as a key factor in Blair's landslide win. The trickery in the media shows another side of corporate power, how control over information can lead to political power. When we take a step back and look at this complex web of influence, it's clear that British politics isn't just about the lawmakers who speak in front of the cameras. It's also about the corporations and the rich, who build power behind the scenes. Their shadows are very big in the halls of power, and the silent lines of money and power shape policies and futures. We move on from talking about the modern power of leaders to talking about the complex ways that power is used. We look at how different groups like bankers and CEOs work with the government, including the military and police, to change the political and economic landscapes. A lot of the stories about power in the UK focus on how powerful business leaders and financiers are. Bankers and CEOs don't just run businesses, they also have a direct impact on economic and regulatory policies by talking to politicians and policymakers. Their participation goes beyond just lobbying. These people make sure that their interests are often put first in the legislative process by giving money to campaigns or having personal relationships with leaders. People have said that this dynamic leads to policies that help the rich more than meeting the needs of society as a whole. The connection between the government and business interests is also complicated, as the government can sometimes be used to support or stabilize economic conditions that are good for businesses. This isn't just about the police keeping the peace, it's also about how the military and state security are used to protect business interests at home and abroad. One example is that state actions, like laws or police, can be manipulated to protect assets, stop people from speaking out against big businesses, or keep areas stable that are more important for national business operations. These ways of keeping things in check show how closely the government and business and finance are connected. The government often uses its power to keep things the same in the economy, which is good for the top business and finance people. This arrangement of power and influence shows not only a partnership, but also a coming together of interests that shapes policies and decides whose needs are met in the halls of power. This way of looking at things shows not only a story of personal desire or business strategy, but also a bigger story about how power is organized and used in modern Britain. This story tells us a lot about how hard it is to keep democracy accountable when big business has a lot of power. Moving on from the mechanisms of control, let's look at how the elite interests form policies, and how these policies affect things like trade unions, public services, and taxes in the UK. In the past, trade groups had a lot of power in shaping labour laws and fighting for workers' rights, but their power has decreased over the years, especially since Margaret Thatcher made changes to the law in the 1980s that were meant to curb their impact a great deal.
The one with the strongest influence, surely.
These rules not only made it harder for unions to go on strike, but they also made it harder for them to get involved in politics. This trend is still going strong today, as policies still try to keep strikes from disrupting public services, while weighing the rights of workers against the greater public interest. There are big differences in how different political groups treat trade unions. For instance, recent Conservative policies have tried to keep limits on trade unions and stress the importance of keeping strikes to a minimum, especially when it comes to vital services. Labour, on the other hand, wants to back trade unions more by getting rid of laws that make their rights less secure and expanding those rights. This shows a big difference in policy views shaped by elite interests and ideological leanings. Also, tax policies are affected by the relationship between the goals of the elite and public services. These policies often help the wealthy by setting up taxes and giving tax breaks that help the rich more than others.
I never pay taxes. If there's a way not to pay, I never pay.
My friend Warren Buffett pays the lower.
This shows how much the elite interests affect fiscal policies. It's not just a story of two people interacting directly. This impact is also a symbol of a larger strategy in which the wealthy and corporations use their economic power to shape public discourse and policy, keeping things the way they want them to be. Regulatory capture is another powerful example of how policies can be changed in a covert manner to help people who control the economy. Regulatory agencies were set up to protect the public interest and keep an eye on certain industries. But this happens when the companies they are meant to regulate take over the agencies. The industries spend a lot of money trying to sway these regulators, so that the rules and measures taken to enforce them are good for them and not for the public or the environment. This makes it possible for officials to start looking out for the industry's best interests, which could lead to rules that hurt competition, protect monopolies, or lower standards of safety and the environment. These unfair laws have a lot of different effects. For example, over the last few decades, economic policies have favored the rich more and more, resulting in a big drop in tax rates for the richest people, while public services and support for most people are often not funded enough. Along with this, there has been less regulation of the financial sector and more tax havens and secrecy. These things help the rich get even richer and more powerful, which makes inequality worse on a world level. Rich people and businesses use tax havens to hide huge amounts of money, which lowers the tax base that is needed to pay for public services. In addition to hurting the economy, these kinds of policies also hurt democracy and social harmony, which leads to more wealth and power going to a small group of people. Oxfam International says that this rising inequality has made people around the world aware of the problem and called for immediate action to fix it and make sure that policies help everyone, not just the wealthy. It's clear that people are becoming more and more aware of these kinds of tactics. The public is aware that powerful elites are influencing policies that affect them, which has led to both anger and a call for changes that will weaken this influence. A power imbalance causes problems for everyone, but people are becoming more aware of these problems, especially when it comes to laws and policies that help the rich but hurt everyone else. It's not just people in the UK who feel this way. People all over the world do too. Many studies and reports show that people don't trust how policies are made or who they help. People are calling for more openness, fair taxation, and less financial and business lobbying because they are so angry. To deal with these problems, movements and changes are being talked about and suggested. For example, a lot of people want stricter rules on how campaign funds and lobbying actions are spent. There is a push for policies that will make the tax system more fair so that rich people pay the same amount of tax as their income and wealth. Some people also want to change the way political campaigns are funded so that money doesn't have as much of an effect on politics. The goal is to create a system where public support of campaigns levels the playing field. More and more people are talking about these reforms. Social groups and non-governmental organizations are leading the way in pushing for changes that will make power more fair and improve democratic government. These groups usually start at the local level and have a lot of support from people from all walks of life and economic backgrounds. They want things to change for everyone.
Rising food prices, a record cost of diesel and soaring energy bills.
As it becomes clearer how the elites play politics, the public becomes more determined to fight for a system that works for everyone, not just a few. The ongoing debates and conversations show the democratic spirit that wants to make sure everyone has a better life and that those in power are held accountable. Now, what do you think about the role of old money in modern politics? Can reforms help balance the scales, or is the influence of wealth in politics an unchangeable reality? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and see you in the next video.